The village of Parośla did not stand out in any way from hundreds of similar villages in Wolynia, modern-day western Ukraine. Kolonia Parośla was quite wealthy, and it had about 130 to 150 Polish inhabitants and 26 farms. All the people there wanted to live in peace, and they were waiting for the Second World War to finally end. Sadly, on February 9th, 1943, almost all of them were brutally murdered by the Ukrainian insurgent army under the command of Hryhory Perehiniak, known under the pseudonym Dovbeshka Korobka. We can just call them the Bandera partisans. Now, let's start from the very beginning. Parośla was a Polish village founded in the 19th century. It was located in the Antonówka commune in the Sarny county, which was part of the Wolynian voivodeship during the time of the Second Polish Republic. Just a quick note, in Antonówka there are two villages named Parośla, numbered 1 and 2. Today we are going to be talking about the first one. Poland regained its independence in 1918 after the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and became known as the Second Polish Republic. Almost 5 million Ukrainians found themselves in this new large Polish state. It was about 14% of the country's entire population. In the Wolynia region, which was incorporated into the Second Polish Republic in 1919 after the defeat of the short-lived West Ukrainian People's Republic, the local Ukrainian population even outnumbered the Poles. This area formed the second largest voivodeship, and according to the 1931 census, 16.6% of its inhabitants were Polish, 27.7% Jewish, and 68% were Ukrainian. And yet the Ukrainian language was banned in government institutions in 1924, and Ukrainian schools were receiving almost no financial support from the state. And not only Ukrainians and Belarusians were being repressed by the Polish government, the Polish Jews were also discriminated against. Have you ever heard of so-called Jewish benches in the back rows of university classrooms? And please do not think I'm some huge Ukraine lover. I just hate it when in almost all Polish history books I've read so far, Poles always describe themselves as the biggest victims. As victims who never did anything bad to anyone, never oppressed anyone. But who invaded Czechoslovakia together with Hitler in 1938? Well, Poland. Who had the worst concentration camps during the Polish-Soviet War? Ever heard of Strzelkovo? I know the Polish elites are to be blamed. But these elites need people, many people who will bring their evil plans to life. And then, in 1939, the war broke out. It is estimated that by 1942 alone, with the significant help of Ukrainian battalions, over 600,000 Jewish people, civilians, were killed in Wolynia and Galicia alone. 3 years after the outbreak of World War II, it was quite difficult to clearly decide who was the enemy and who was the ally. The brutalization of everyday life completely destroyed relations between neighbors. Ukrainian nationalists saw their chance in this political, ideological, and societal chaos. They wanted to build, quote, an independent, ethnically clean Ukraine without a foreign element, unquote. The nationalists put their plan in motion at the beginning of 1943. However, the very first massacres of innocent Polish citizens appeared as early as 1939. One day I will tell you about Potutory, Boków, Dreszczów, Żuków, Jakubowce. The massacre in Parośla was preceded by a Ukrainian attack on the town of Włodzimierzyce, carried out by a unit, probably also under the command of Hryhory Perehiniak. The action began on the night of February 7th, or according to Professor Grzegorz Motyka, on February 8th, 1943. After the end of the operation, the Ukrainian insurgent army unit withdrew from the town of Włodzimierzyce and headed to the Polish colony of Parośla. On the morning of February 9th, 1943, the village of Parośla was surrounded by a large group of Ukrainians armed with machine guns and axes. According to several Polish witness accounts, Ukrainians entered the village pretending to be Soviet partisans. The so-called partisan units split into smaller groups and spread out throughout the village. 4 to 5 men entered each house. There inside, they told the local women to bake bread and prepare food for them. They wanted to be fed well before the fight. At least, that's what they claimed. At around 3 p.m., the partisans ordered the villagers to lie face down on the ground, and then they immediately tied them up. This was, the murderers explained, to protect them from the revenge of the Germans. It was a very common practice back then, used by Soviet partisans to protect the local population who had helped them. Why should it be any different today? The slaughter began as soon as the last person was tied up. The so-called partisans started killing those who were lying face down on the ground. They would chop their... In total, over 150 people were brutally murdered that day. Only about 8 to 12 people survived the massacre. One of the survivors was Witold Kolodiński, a 12-year-old boy at the time. He survived despite being hit in the head with an axe. All the farms and houses were looted. The village no longer exists. After the war, one of the murderers, Wasilewski, who had been caught by the Soviets, described the massacre as follows. All Poles were cut into pieces, babies as well. This terrible crime is considered to be a prelude to the large-scale genocide of Poles in Wolynia, carried out by the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, a military arm of Stepan Bandera's Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists. If I'm not mistaken, today they are celebrated as heroes in one unnamed state. God save us all. This world is completely up, I'm sorry. Between 1943 and 1945, members of the Ukrainian Insurgent Army massacred thousands upon thousands of Polish civilians all throughout Wołyń. Only during this 3-year period, it is estimated that around 60,000 to 100,000 Poles died at the hands of Ukrainian nationalists.